The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Welcome to Albany County News. I'm Mary Rozak, the Director of Communications for Albany County. And in the next 30 minutes or so, I hope you'll learn something interesting, exciting, informative, maybe about a program or service that you might even be able to use or someone you know. My guest today is from the Albany County Department of Probation, and he is acting director of that department, Bill Connors. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Mary.
You know, when we hear probation, we are in very much a law and order generation and mentality. First thing that springs to mind, people might say, probation. Is that the same as parole? What or is there a difference?
Yes, there is a difference. Probation generally is immediately put on probation from a court, local court or county court, Supreme Court, and our possibility released from local incarceration. A person can serve up to 6 months incarceration and then be placed on probation, whereas parole, you would be over a year and then be released to parole, a year in the Department of Corrections or longer.
Okay, so less than a year probation,
Yep.
More than a year parole. Generally, it's the degree of the offense that dictates.
Well, generally, the offenses can be similar in nature, but it depends upon the person and their background and many factors, negotiated plea, whether they went to trial or not. But sentences of probation vary in different types of convictions, including misdemeanors and felonies, but primarily parole is only felonies.
Well, then let's talk about, since we're talking probation, let's talk about some of the kinds of offenses that might lead to a sentence of probation.
Okay. So generally, we have persons on probation for misdemeanors and felonies. Typical misdemeanor sentences are assault, petty larceny, theft, possession of drugs. And for felony, they can be similar types of crimes, but it's a higher degree of level of a punitive where they could be sentenced to state incarceration, whereas misdemeanor, they could only serve up to 1 year in a local jail.
So someone comes in, or it's a DWI, let's say, and they have probation. What does that mean? They come into the probation office and do what? Say what?
Yeah. So generally, it starts out, the whole process of probation starts at a court where a person enters into a plea or is found guilty by trial, and the court orders a pre-sentence investigation. So generally, we have 6 weeks or more to complete that, and we have the person come in and we complete a full background investigation, including their legal history, their psychosocial history, their mental health, their education, their employment, and complete it with an evaluative analysis to help the judge help him in his sentencing guidelines for what he's going to sentence the person for. They would go back to court upon our completion of the court, and they would then be sentenced to probation. So generally, they would report after their court appearance, and that's when we would start their supervision plan.
And so what is a supervision plan? You now know all about this person, essentially.
Yeah.
The judge, she has said, okay, 6 months probation, however long probation. And actually, how long can probation extend to? Is there a maximum amount of time for probation?
Yes, there is. Generally, sentences vary for different types of convictions. And for misdemeanor, generally, it's 3 years. For felony, it's 5. For certain crimes, it's up to a lifetime, 25 years or longer. For certain felonies.
Such as an example of something?
Selling drugs,
okay.
Possession of drugs,
okay.
high-level offenses. It requires certain things where the district attorney, they need to assist in their defense and assist in other matters with the district attorney, and then a person may be eligible for that type of sentencing. There's also other type of sentences varying in length that the judge has where they can sentence someone for shorter periods of time with mitigating circumstances for similar convictions. And we see that often, and those types could be 1, 2, 3, 4, our original 3 and 5. Sex offenders are generally sentenced 3 years for misdemeanor and 6 years for a felony. So there's a whole host of ranges that the courts have for sentencing guidelines for offenders.
Okay, so you found out everything you've done about someone. You've done a pre-sentencing report. The judge says this is the probation period. Someone walks in. What happens, and what is the intent and purpose of probation?
So generally, it's to address a need that was identified during the investigation with a program plan to assist that person towards their own rehabilitation. So common themes of persons on probation are substance abuse, homelessness, employment, all matters of life-altering events that affect the person. So they would come in after court. Generally, there would be a set of conditions. That's a court order that the judge would authorize us to supervise them with during the period of probation. Those conditions would be reviewed, and we would review their needs based upon the conditions, the program plan where they needed to attend substance abuse, continued work history, and address how often they would have to report.
Okay, so it's entirely set up so not only so that there's not a reoffense, but so that the life circumstance changes so that that person's life may be better in some way. You talked about job, you talked about home circumstance.
Our core mission is rehabilitation and promoting safety within the community, assisting that person towards rehabilitation while maintaining them in a safe environment to continue their daily activity.
So when someone then comes in and reports to a probation officer, at first you set up a plan. How does that work?
Okay, the plan may be if they're unemployed, we have to look at their prior employment history if they are able to obtain employment. If they're not, an example would be we need to address their skill level and work from the very beginning and assist them developing a goal, whatever the employment goal would be that they could achieve based on their history.
How do you determine what is reasonable? I mean, quite frankly, in this day and age, someone might come in and say, well, I want to be a rocket scientist to get a job. I mean, obviously, I'm being extreme in that. Yeah. But how do you determine what would be an appropriate job or path for that probationer to go down?
Well, it's based upon their experience and our current level of education and in their job history. If they're able to, if a job is in reason, there's no reason a probation officer can't work with that offender towards their goal.
So, as you're coming up with this plan, what kinds of benchmarks are on that? I mean, are there certain numbers of job interviews that someone must go on, or how do you ensure that the probationer is going through this plan?
There are generally it would start off with the frequency of where they have applied, how often they would apply. Many probationers, offenders may need to provide lists of where they applied and applications to the probation officer for verification. So the condition is that they maintain full-time employment. If they're not maintaining employment, we need to make sure that they're employing. And if they're not obtaining employment, we would look at their background, and it could be they're not filling out the applications correctly, they're not obtaining interviews. It could be their legal history, they're not presenting it in a manner that an employer would consider employment. And based upon that, we would look at alternate programming, maybe to assist them in some of our work programming that we provide to offenders to develop a job search history that they're going to be able to accomplish it.
How does the probation officer actually, check to make sure that, okay, someone says they went and they applied at Walmart, or they went and they applied, somewhere else? Someone providing a list is one thing, but how do you actually verify that? That's
difficult with many new rules in HIPAA. It would they would have to provide detailed information of where they went and who they spoke with, if the dates. So if someone actually came in and filled out 10 applications in one day, and we would have to look at that. Maybe they're just going through the process fast, and they're not really going through an entire process to obtain an interview from a store or a company. And we would look at the whole process from start to finish and try to help them make a determination of where they're applying, if they're even going to get that type of job.
Getting a job is one component. If someone finds that they are actually going and they're not successful getting a job, what does probation do? I know you have some very specific programs. I know one in particular. Let's talk about Ready, Set, Work.
Yeah, Ready, Set, Work is a program that was originally started by the National Institute of Corrections that's targeted towards offenders, and it assists them in obtaining employment. It's a several-week component, and it starts with the very beginning, the application process, how to fill out an application, how to possibly complete a resume that's required, how to disclose your legal history and continue in the process. Many offenders disclose their legal history, but they don't have any explanation to go with it, whether it was a one-time mistake or something had happened and they got caught up in the system and were convicted. So we assist them with a lot of matters at the application process, to resume writing and going through getting the interview and disclosing that they are on probation, they do have a conviction.
How tough is it? I know this is probably a tough question, but how tough is it for someone who has been convicted of a crime? And I know the nature of the crime would dictate sometimes, how hard it is to get a job. But the reaction must be. It
is more difficult. Obviously, if an employer could choose between someone with no conviction and someone with a conviction, they may lean towards the person without a conviction. So we take a lot of effort to teach the person how to disclose that they did have a mistake, and they're willing to move past that and work hard towards their own rehabilitation, including employment.
Mm-hmm. So now we've gotten past the job component of this. I'm sure there are lots of other components to the plan. What else constitutes a plan and visits from a probationer to their probation officer?
Many of our offenders are involved with substance abuse. And part of our program plan is to obviously have them stop using illegal drugs, and many are in need of treatment. We have to make referrals for many programs, substance abuse, and while they're in programming and while they're on probation, we conduct several tests to determine if they are using drugs or alcohol.
Mm-hmm. I'm talking today with the acting director of the Albany County Department of Probation, Bill Connors. So, Bill, we're talking about, obviously, drugs, a big problem, and opioid use, a huge problem. Have you seen an increase in those that are on probation coming in with drug issues and particularly with opioid abuse issues?
Yeah, we have. I would estimate somewhere above 70% of our probationers have substance abuse issues, which led them to us. And many are opiates involved, and it's difficult. And it's a very powerful drug, and people, through no will of their own, become hooked on painkillers, and many started out legally prescription. People do continue to use that drug and use it illegally, which causes many issues, which leads them to us, yes.
So in general, we're just going to talk a blanket kind of a plan. What approach, because it's got to be different, I would assume, when you have someone coming in with a substance abuse issue, what kind of approach and frequency do you take and do you use for those probationers?
Well, we would, first off, substance abuse may be the primary issue that needs to be addressed until they are able to to stop using drugs, they can't be successful in other areas, including employment or other things.
So how do you tackle that?
So we would use a graduated approach in treatment. So many would initially be referred to outpatient treatment, and many hopefully would be successful as they manage that on an outpatient status, being able to see a drug counselor weekly or how often is required, and they would understand their issue and be able to maintain it and remain substance abuse free. As if things were progressively worse where they continued to abuse drugs, we would look at other alternate treatment programs, perhaps an inpatient program, and often perhaps court intervention, court sanctions, to help them, assist them stop using drugs.
I would assume that anyone who has a substance abuse problem would know that every time, or I would think every time they would be coming in, they would be having some kind of a test.
Yes,
to determine whether they are
yeah.
on a substance.
You're correct. We do test in the office. We test urinalysis, and we test almost every drug, and it shows up whether they have used.
Are there any ways? There's always, with every test, there's a way to get around it, and I'm not asking you to divulge anything, but are there safeguards so that you can tell if someone is trying to?
There are. We have caught people many times trying to deceive and get over on us with their urinalysis. All urinalysis must be observed by a probation officer, gender-based. We have a separate restroom that they're entered into when their probation officer collects urinalysis under observation, yes.
Now, I don't want to make a leap, but is it if someone fails their drug test, is their probation revoked, or what happens?
No, not immediately. We would assess the situation and determine where they're at in conjunction with their drug treatment program. It may be where they need a higher level of drug programming in order to stop using, and we would probably do that before any court intervention, where they would move up in level in treatment.
Your office deals with everyone from adults to children. Let's talk about some of the differences, or are there really differences in how the probation system works for an adult versus a juvenile?
Of course, yeah. We are broken down into a juvenile and adult division. Juvenile, we have a little less than 1% of the county on probation. We average about 2,700 to 2,800 cases at any given time. And that's persons right now that are age 16 and over. There is legislation that has been submitted several times to raise the age to 16 and 17. That hasn't been passed yet.
Raise the age, and for those who are not familiar,
raise the age would move the level of juvenile delinquency to 16 and 17, where that is currently considered an adult. New York is one of 2 states left in the nation that treats 16 and 17-year-olds as adults.
Okay.
So our juvenile division has two roles. We have an intake diversion unit and a family court unit. The intake diversion unit receives all the complaints of juvenile delinquents, kids that are arrested by police. Our PINs, persons in need of supervision, petitions are filed generally by schools or by parents where they accuse a child of being ungovernable. We would work with that child and their family to develop a plan and divert them from ever going to family court.
Okay.
That whole mission is to keep them from going to family court and divert them from the system. So if they were to go to family court, many things could happen. The court could put them in detention, it could place them out of their home, or it could sentence them to a juvenile term of probation. And we do have a family court unit that manages persons, children that are sentenced to probation. And generally that term is for up to a year for juvenile delinquency matters or for PINS petitions, and it can be extended for up to 2 years.
Okay. So this is a component that I don't think many people were aware of, that the simple fact that you talked about probation being rehab, but this is something to avoid having someone actually, when we're talking about children,
right,
having to get into the court system.
We give children and their family every opportunity to not go to court with our intake diversion unit, meeting with the child and their family to discuss the plan which led them to us and divert them from ever going to court.
What is the success rate of that?
The success rate of that is difficult to monitor, although it's well over, it's been up to 80% at times of people that are diverted from court, although some cases do go to court. Part of the process of intake is that they need to agree to cooperate with the plan that's set down by a probation officer at the initial meeting. The plan may be something as minimal as an apology letter to the victim. It may be to participate in programming. It may be a small period of supervision. Intake has the authority to supervise a child for up to 4 months if they agree to cooperate with us. And during that time, they could be offered services of other programs which are similar to adult, but which would also include the family.
So do you work in tandem with the County Department for Children, Youth, and Families?
We do.
Okay.
We do. We work very closely with the Children and Family Services Department, and many of our children that we see also are involved with them for different types of petitions, child abuse or neglect petitions, and they come to us simultaneously at the same time.
Wow. You know, something interesting when, if anyone goes to our website, which is albanycounty.com, and you actually go to the Department of Probation, I bring this up because you're looking for volunteers. And when I say looking for volunteers, it ties in nicely. We are talking about the Juvenile Accountability Board.
Right.
What is that?
The Juvenile Accountability Board is a program, and it's one of our top programs that I like to talk about. It is persons from the community that hear cases of juveniles that are arrested for juvenile delinquent acts. They would appear in front of a board of persons that had applied to us, that we've accepted, and that we trained in the process of restorative practice, a restorative justice model approach. So the child would appear in front of them and hear the matter which led them to us, a juvenile delinquency crime, and they would figure out and met out some type of sentence for the child, either some type of apology letter, work with the victim to repair the harm that they caused, perhaps some types of community service as a restorative practice model.
How often does this board meet?
The board meets, the frequency varies. It depends on the amount of children that are coming in that require this. But the board is generally set up. We have 3 boards undergoing right now: Albany, Bethlehem, and Guilderland, where this board meets. And so it's at several locations in the county that easy access for children and their families to attend.
So once again, the criteria for someone to volunteer?
So when the child came in, so any child that's arrested in Albany County, the police must file the petition with our probation intake unit first. So they would be given an appearance ticket. The child would report with their family, and a probation officer would conduct a preliminary assessment of the crime and the child's needs and their family participation, and perhaps it would be determined at that time this case could be diverted from court, and one of the options may be to attend the JCAB Juvenile Accountability Board.
When you're looking for volunteers for that board, what does someone have to be? Do they have to live in a certain jurisdiction?
Well, generally they have to live or work in Albany County, and we're looking for people that are motivated, that want to work with children and their families to help them and assist them and direct them toward a lead law-abiding life. People that are interested in that can go to our website, albanycounty.com/probation, and it has information on how to apply. They would contact a senior probation officer that's in charge of the program, and she would review the programming with them. And if they're interested, they would fill out an application. We would review it for acceptance, and they would attend one of our trainings on a Saturday at the probation department. We have an 8-hour training several times a year for new volunteers that are interested in the program.
All right, that's certainly something I think that many people will find interesting. How hard is it to get volunteers, though, for that?
It varies at different times of the year for different people that want to participate. Many people are long-standing participants. Other people maybe serve up to a year or two and then move on. So certainly no person that's interested is ever turned down if they're qualified to be on the board.
Very interesting. We'll segue into another interesting thing that is on the website, and that is paying online. When I think about probation, I didn't think I would see a push here button to pay online. What's that all about?
Well, one of the mandates of probation is collection of money, and probation department is the designated collection agency for Albany County.
Okay.
So there are several fees and money that we collect. The first one is obviously restitution. We collect restitution for persons that are sentenced to probation. We also collect restitution called non-probation cases on a couple different types of cases. A conditional discharge case in a court in Albany County where the person is convicted and they are sentenced only to pay restitution, no probation. Okay. And the other type of case is persons that are going to state prison docks. The court would order restitution upon their release.
Okay.
So,
okay.
All right. And the other type of fee that we collect the supervision fee for DWI. Mm-hmm. So generally our collections average about $500,000 a year. And we collect 5% surcharge, and that's returned to Albany County. And we also collect $30 a month for persons that are on probation for DWI. And that's authorized under state executive law.
Interesting. So since you're talking about DWI, I know in the last minute or two that we have, I'd like to touch on the ignition interlock, because if you do have a DWI
Yes.
conviction.
Ignition interlock is based upon Leander law, a tragic case where a child was killed. And it requires installation of an interlock device on any person convicted under DWI for Leander law. DWI is one of our most frequent probation sentences. We have probably close to 600 persons on probation for DWI, mm-hmm. and we also monitor CD interlock DWI. So if a person was arrested for DWI and they were go to court, they may not get probation, but they would be sentenced to install an interlock device on their car, and we're required to monitor that. And that case is pretty high caseload, and we have probably at any given time 600 to 700 persons on that.
Wow, that's a constant?
That's a constant thing. Generally, persons are convicted of conditional discharge for 1 year, and if they own a vehicle, they must install an interlock device on it. And it's our job to notify the court that gets done, and if it does not get done, we notify the court. And any violations during the period of conditional discharge, we also require to notify the court.
In the interest of time, to speed this part along, it's when you try and start the engine, you must do some kind of breathalyzer or something?
Right. So a person would be given a list of vendors, approved vendors by New York State, and they would go and get the interlock installed, and they would be given instruction. The vendor would teach them how to use it, and there would be an actual breathalyzer installed in their car, and it would provide computer immediate results to the vendor, which are transmitted to us.
So the car cannot be started if someone is in excess or
Correct.
breathes in excess of what's allowable by law.
Yes, the car would not start, and it would.
Or actually, does it? I said allowable by law. Does it trace any amount of alcohol, mouthwash?
It traces any amount, and oftentimes there are what we call a pass-fail, where a person does not realize they just did something that would not allow their car to be started.
Okay. All right. Fascinating. A lot of interesting things with the Department of Probation that I'm sure people did not realize, Bill. So I thank you for
You're
joining
welcome.
us.
Thank you,
joining
Mary.
us today. So joining us today, Bill Connors, the Acting Director of the Albany County Department of Probation. I'm Mary Rozak. This has been Albany County News. Thanks for joining us. I hope to see you again soon.